The plane carried its own weather that day, a blue so wide it felt like a promise you could walk under. Heat lay over the earth in patient bands, and the wind moved like a slow animal through the grass. Thomas Morgan rode the fence line with the practiced economy of a man who had learned to spend his strength in the right places. Juniper's ears tipped to the far horizon as if she could read time there. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods a dust ribbon rose, thin and deliberate. That was the first sign. He stopped at the ridge and let the day speak. On the low flats, a knot of movement gathered itself into a form. Then the form broke into many. A band of Mustangs crossed the field in a long arc, their bodies throwing light in pieces. They were the color of every mile the sun had ever touched. Bays and roans and one gray like a winter morning. Thomas's breath changed without asking permission. He had seen wild horses before. He had never seen this one. She ran slightly ahead of the others and slightly apart, as if running were both her hunger and her answer. Black as a storm shelf, mane pouring like water over stone, eyes dark and full of a refusal older than fences. The herd's rhythm bent around her. She was the line they followed and the line they did not cross. When she turned, the others turned. When she braked, dust rose like applause. She did not acknowledge applause. She acknowledged only wind. They came close enough to wreath the ridge in sound. Hooves made a low thunder held politely beneath the earth. Thomas and Juniper stood still, 2 notes inside a larger chord. The mare cut toward a stand of sage. The angle showed a white scar on her shoulder shaped like a tilted crescent. It flashed once and was gone. She never looked at the man on the ridge, but he felt studied anyway. Some assessments do not require eyes. 10 minutes later they were ghosts, and the plane remembered how to be empty. Juniper shifted her weight and breathed out hard as if to settle a score with excitement. Thomas said the mare's name aloud without knowing he was naming. He called her Sable. The word fit in the mouth the way certain truths do. It did not announce itself. It sat down and waited for the room to understand. News moves through ranch country like water through dry ground. The neighbor, too, draws over, had seen the band near the railroad cut. A pair of hands from the county yard said a dark mare had lifted a latch with her teeth and freed 2 geldings for no better reason than that the latch deserved to be solved. Some boys had tried to haze the herd with bikes for the sport of seeing speed. The bikes gave up. The boys told the story with the revisionist humility of people whose measurements had been corrected. Days arranged themselves into a pattern of glimpses. At dawn, prints near the creek that did not match any domestic hoof in the valley. At noon, a strand of dark mane caught on barbed wire and released without blood. At evening, a silhouette on the ridge that was not a shadow, because shadows do not look back. Sable moved like a fact, and the land conspired to keep her secret while advertising her existence. Thomas did not set traps. He did not set intentions strong enough to smell like traps. He mended the washout on the east fence. He cleaned the tanks. He rode the long loop past the cottonwoods and let his eyes learn the grammar of distances again. All the while, the promise he did not speak grew muscle and bone inside the day. He would not break her. He would not even try. But he would make a place where a creature like that could come and go and remain herself. If she ever wanted a door, he meant to have one standing. The first storm of late summer built itself from the ground up. Heat rose, clouds stacked like hay, light thinned to a pewter sheen and then collapsed into thunder. The sky had that color a bell has just after it is struck. Thomas pushed hay under the long shed, set out extra salt, and left the barn doors ajar. A storm knows how to make its own invitations. His only job was not to answer rudely. Evening went green at the edges. Wind came through in pages. Juniper pinned her ears in the way of animals who can count the seconds between flash and report. When the rain finally arrived, it was not polite. The ridge disappeared. The yard drew a shallow map of puddles that negotiated with gravity and lost. Thomas leaned in the barn doorway and watched the world be washed into a simpler shape. That was when movement gathered at the yard's edge. They did not pour. They did not stampede. They assembled as if the storm had called them to a meeting the sky was too busy to chair. Sable came first. She stopped short of the light and measured the barn without sentiment. Her ears worked like algebra. She did not flinch at thunder. She cataloged it. One by one, the others stood under the lee of the long shed, running water off their backs like old arguments. Lightning wrote temporary scripture across the far hills. Thomas stepped backward to make space. No one followed him. No one needed to. In the reflected light, he saw that the white crescent on Sable's shoulder had thickened and healed into an emblem. She set her weight the way leaders stand when they do not want followers to know they are tired. He felt his throat behave oddly. He found a bucket like a man finds a hat he has worn for years and forgot to notice. He set it near the edge of the light and poured clean water that steamed like breath. She did not move until the second peel had rolled and broken. Then she placed a hoof 3 inches forward and reset the balance of the yard. Her nose lowered, nostrils flared, and the water changed shape by being attended to. The others waited because she did. When she finished, she looked past the bucket into the cool interior of the barn. The smell of dry wood and hay lifted like a memory. She did not step inside. She filed the shape and sound and temperature of the offer and left it for later. The storm passed through like a large animal that knows its own body and does not apologize for it. Air cleared in the sudden way air learns to clear when heat has done too much. Stars opened like windows. The band folded itself into the dark and was gone. The yard was full of the evidence of their presence. The water trough was a book the sky had signed. The fence wore draped mane like a ribbon saved after a dance. Thomas touched none of it. The evidence was its own kind of living thing and needed to cool. Morning arrived with the smell of wet iron and turned earth. The plane had been cleaned to its bones. He walked the periphery and read the night. Prince told a confident story. Not domestic stillness, not fear. An old map of sovereignty drawn lightly to save ink. He found his way to the ridge and looked toward the cottonwoods. On the far side of the creek, a dark shape stood where the ground lifted into a small bench. Sable watched the ranch with the impersonal attention of weather. He tipped his hat, an old human reflex thrown up to meet an older non-human mind. She did not answer the hat. He had not expected her to. The days after the storm learned a different temper. The band returned in small ways. The water level in the tank dropped a fraction more than irrigated acres could account for. The longshed smelled of horse at odd hours. Once, a halter Thomas had left over a post had moved itself 3 feet, entangled in a nail with knots he did not tie. He began to speak to the air when he crossed the yard at dusk. Not to coax, not to claim, only to set words down where listening might happen. The plain is a listening animal. He was adding a narrative to its diet. When he finally saw Sable again in full light, she had a companion at her hip, a yearling filly with the same black coat diluted by the unpracticed gloss of youth. The filly's steps were smaller versions of her mother's answers. She was curious enough to learn and proud enough to pretend that learning was not the project. They stood 300 yards off in a line of cottonwoods that had been losing the same leaves in the same order for decades. The filly looked at the trough, then at the barn, then at the man who had not moved. Sable looked at the wind. Thomas did not raise a hand. He did not lower his eyes. He did not become a creature that wanted. He became a place. The ranch shortened itself and widened itself around that decision. By sundown, they had already gone. He exhaled the kind of breath a person hopes not to need twice in one lifetime. A horse like that could make a man bargain with gods he did not believe in. He preferred to bargain with what he could build. The next morning, he hung a length of soft rope on a post well inside the barn, not as a lure, only as an element in the room. He swept the aisle to the degree that dust might take personally. He set a flake of hay near the threshold and another farther in, both angled as if wind had moved them there. He opened the north window to let the air draw through and make its own argument for shelter. He took Juniper out for a long trot along the eastern field and asked nothing else from the day. Sable did not come. The band did not appear. By evening, he had almost convinced himself that he preferred it that way. The logic held until night fell, and the yard remembered the shape of their hooves without them. The sky loaded itself with stars as if inventory meant safety. Out past the lane, a coyote broke a thought into shorter syllables. Thomas stood in the doorway and let the darkness not bother with him. Across the yard, a silhouette slid along the side of the long shed. One shape, not two. He did not move. The shape came closer and broke into detail. Sable stepped into the spill of starlight, black now, not like night but like the polished core of something that had always been hard. She paused with one hoof half lifted. She watched the door. The air between door and horse became more true than either. He spoke only once and only to the room. Welcome was a small word. It fit. She crossed the threshold and stood with the hay at her feet as if this were not a concession, but a reconnaissance. He let silence do the moving. At her hip, the white crescent shone briefly and then went back to being a story he had not been told. She ate without hurry, listening with the inventory of a general. When she was done, she turned and left. The way a visitor left a church when she had come for the architecture and not for the sermon. That was enough for a first day. Enough is not failure. Enough is the size of a living thing when it is honest about what it can carry. He set the rope back where it had been and leaned his head against the door jamb. The wild mare had entered the barn and exited unchanged. He liked her more for it. The next weeks did not behave like a training plan. They behaved like weather. Sable arrived and did not arrive. She left before the time it would have been convenient for her to stay. She stayed long enough to ruin any claim he could make that he did not care if she stayed. Some afternoons he found her sleeping on her feet in the deep shade of the cottonwoods, the filly to the leeward side, both of them adjusting to wind-like sails that knew the harbor but preferred the sea. When she came near the yard, she came only as far as the water and sometimes the threshold. If Thomas was visible, she measured him and adjusted the range by an inch until the range returned the answer she required. He learned to be the furniture of his own barn. He learned that respect has a smell and that hands carry it. The filly began to arrive without her mother, not often and not boldly. Enough to show that questions had been allowed. The filly's nostrils flared at a currycomb left on a sill. She nudged a halter with one tentative knuckle of lips and flinched when it caught and fell. Her fear cleared quickly. She stepped into the aisle and lifted her head to the north window and found the stream of air there and filed it as a small locating truth. Thomas watched from the shadow opposite and counted the seconds between startle and recovery. The count shortened over days. The count told a story about the future. The count asked for patience. He began to place objects in the aisle as if setting a table for a guest who did not want food but might be interested in the cut of the wood. A saddle pad. A blanket folded edge to the door. A length of soft rope coiled, spiraled like a sleeping snake. The filly learned the scent of each. She touched everything with that delicate meeting of curiosity and caution young things carry like their first language. Sable entered twice during those lessons and watched without interrupting. She did not rebuke the filly. She did not endorse the barn. She allowed the existence of a room where edges had been sanded and eyes could rest. Some permissions are stronger by being quiet. Thomas did not try to touch Sable. He did not look at the filly when Sable was watching. He allowed personal contact only as a byproduct of mutual work, and there was almost no work between them except the standing. Cantering through a corral can teach certain propositions. Standing beside a door teaches others. He preferred the second kind. He had strength for both. He had patience only for the one that kept dignity whole. At dusk on the first cool day, he stood 8 feet inside the aisle, the rope looped open in his hand, not offering, not hiding. The filly came with the indulgent look of youth at supper time. She found the nearest flake of hay and extracted the sweet bits as if writing a letter about sugar. Sable stopped at the door. Thomas did not move. He did not raise his hand. He lowered his shoulder by a fraction and turned his heart toward the floor. Sable lifted her head and breathed in a deliberate draft of air from where he stood. His shirt, the rope, the ghost of coffee, the mineral of old wood, the small electricity of a human body doing the hard work of shrinking without vanishing. One step carried her past the threshold. Another brought her even with the filly. A third rested her inside the barn, not as subject but as surveyor. The rope remained an object with no proposals in it. The room lightened by ounces. Night took the sky back. One by one, the horses in the long shed shifted weight, a quiet shuffling of lives at rest. The filly finished half the flake and turned to the aisle's window like a pilgrim confirming the direction of prayer. Sable lowered her head and inhaled the hay's practical sermon. Thomas exhaled and finally stepped backward until the night owned him again. He did not run anything to ground. He allowed the ground to be there when hooves wanted it. In the morning, an imprint of a shoulder waited in the straw where Sable had stood longer than her pride would have described. He touched nothing. He counts the imprint as a letter addressed to him but not yet opened. He had work and did it. The sun traced its daily slow sentence along the ridge. The creek argued its own grammar with willow roots. The sign at the lane learned new dust and wore it well. At Willow Creek, the rule was simple. No animal was asked to give up what had kept it alive. The work was to build a third thing between human insistence and wild refusal. A space where both could survive without lying. Sable seemed the proof of a rule he had not written. She did not need saving. The mare did not need worship either. She needed a door that did not teach dependence and a yard that could repair itself after questions. He prayed to competence and small accuracy. He asked nothing from heaven that he could not build with tools. The day the latch turned was also the day a train went through late and long. The sound lifted and flattened across the field and arrived at the barn like a rumor with a hard edge. Sable flinched an inch. The filly stepped 3 inches and then came back 2. Thomas did not watch either one directly. He moved to the north door and set his hand on the frame, palm down. He did it because sometimes an animal reads the temperature of your bones through wood. When the air finished shaking, Sable exhaled a single line of breath and investigated the gate chain with her lips. The habit looked like mischief. It was engineering. She found the weak link and worried it and set it back and worried it again. She was not trying to leave. She was solving. He learned that a problem solved by a wild mind is a dance step, not a transaction. He replaced the chain with a leather strap and a pin that would not hurt a mouth. He did not make it impossible. He made it elegant. The next day, the strap lay on the ground precisely where Sable would have placed it if she were tidying. The gate stood open on the right side. The filly stood inside and outside, both, and seemed to have learned a new preposition. On an evening of thin gold light, Thomas carried a brush into the yard. He set it down 5 feet from the door and walked away. Sable did not look at the brush. The filly did, in the squirrel-quick way of the young. She sniffed the bristles, sneezed at the dust, and considered whether this object might be friend, enemy, or idea. She settled on idea. Ideas are the best kind of friend. For 3 days, the brush sat where he had placed it. Each day, it moved a little. On the 4th, it was inside the aisle near the north window. On the 5th, it was back outside, bristles up, as if to say the sunlight told it something the window could not pronounce. He laughed once, softly, the way people remember that laughter is not an admission of defeat, but an agreement with oxygen. He began reading aloud again in the evenings, not because horses confirm content, because words unearthed gently in a room with living bodies behave better. He read the old notebook and lines that had waited for a decade to be heard. He read the names he had written under a title the sign did not yet wear. He read the sentence that had made the promise a place. We stay. Sable stood with her face half in shadow and half in the sheer threat of sun. The filly leaned her muzzle toward the sound as if language were assent. The brush lay on its side under the north window. Juniper chewed hay with the acquired indifference of a matron who knows what a barn is for. Thomas paused and stepped out into the yard and let the barn keep its own secrets. One morning, the filly came to the door and did not stop. She entered the aisle and found the exact position where a hand might be lifted to meet her cheek. There was no hand. She stood there anyway and learned stillness as a language that expresses thanks without declaring it. Sable watched and did not interrupt. She did not bless the moment. She allowed the moment to bless itself. The first touch did not happen that day. It did not happen the next. It arrived the way rain begins on a dry road, spotted and then sudden, and then taken for granted. Thomas stood at the threshold with palms open and eyes soft on the ground. The filly approached, interrogated the space between his ribs and the morning air, and placed her cheek in the bracket of his hand as if this were a story she had already told herself and now wanted corroboration for. He did not move for 3 breaths. 4. He moved on the 5th because stillness had been learned, and now motion could be offered without insult. Zabel shifted weight like a judge revising a sentence to something more accurate. For the first time, he saw something flicker across her face that looked like old relief, remembering its own shape. She lowered her head an inch. Her ears turned to the wind, and then to him, and then to the filly. She did not enter. She did not leave. On the day the first halter lay across the filly's neck, it did not matter what came next. The halter was not a capture. It was a sentence frame into which freedom could pour and be understood. The filly stood upright against her instincts and earned a new kind of balance. Thomas lifted the rope and let it fall, lifted and let it fall, until falling became another word for not being afraid. Zabel stepped forward then and found the rope with her gaze and did not panic. She tracked it down to the loop in his hand and then up again to the open angle of the halter. She breathed and let the breath indicate approval as if she had been asked a question, and the answer was yes, with corrections. He read the yes. He accepted the corrections. The filly walked 2 steps and stopped. 2 and stopped. 2 and stopped. By sundown, the sentence read this way: walk when invited, stop when asked. Stand when standing is the work. Go when going is the thing that leaves you intact. That night, the hill took the names in their new order and filed them beside the stones the way a good clerk keeps what matters where it will be found. The wind carried the filing noise down to the barn and into the long shed where the elders slept. Juniper snored delicately. The filly dreamed with her feet. Zabel stood outside the door and accepted the heir's report. Autumn wrote the pasture in a sharper hand. The grass lost its summer softness and gained a sound like patience when the wind moved through it. The cottonwoods colored themselves gold and held the color as long as pride would allow. The mornings carried a thin edge and then a thicker one. The trough steamed once and then again. Winter sent word without arriving. On an afternoon that looked like honesty, the filly followed Thomas into the round pen as if she had decided circles were just long, straight lines that had turned thoughtful. He did not chase. He did not join. He walked the outer rail with the kind of stride a person uses when he is measuring his own heart. The filly matched 3 steps behind and 3 steps inside, and when he stopped, she stopped, and when he turned, she remembered how to turn without losing herself. The work lasted 7 minutes. He ended it at 6. Leaving something in the bucket teaches thirst a better lesson than drinking it dry. Zabel stood at the fence and did not approve and did not object. She watched for the kind of small harm that sneaks into a day wearing new clothes. When none arrived, she lowered her head and cut a few inches of the grass stubble that had been denying it was already winter. The round pen opened, and the filly stepped out taller because she had not been made smaller. The next day, and for a string of days after, the work compressed into a few minutes and then released. Words took their cues from quiet. Touch occurred only when the air had prepared a place for it. The halter learned to be feather and not handcuff. The rope learned to be letter and not law. Zabel did not enter the pen. The pen entered her. Some barriers are less architecture than weather. When the first snow came, it did not stay. It wrote its white sentence and then let sun read it back to water. In the wet cold, the wild mare and her daughter stood with hips canted to keep the wind on one side. Thomas carried water in buckets like a ritual that would not survive automation. He set hay under the long shed where the air kept the edges dry. He spoke the names he knew and the ones he did not yet deserve. He hung a wool cooler on a nail and left it for the day when the filly might decide wet was less noble than warm. It was on a morning of thin sunlight that Zabel walked into the barn as if the decision were none of his business. She went to the north window and found the winter light and parked it across her back. She turned her head toward the aisle and made the air there more important by looking at it. The brush lay where it had become a resident. The halter hung with the gravity of new tools. The rope waited because waiting was the work it had been given. Thomas stood where he had learned to stand, the ground soft under his boots from years of being asked to hold what needed holding. He did not lift a hand. He did not lower his eyes. He adjusted his breathing to match the cadence of an animal who believed in nothing as strongly as she, believed in her own right to decide the meaning of a door. The filly came to him and placed her cheek where it had learned a hand lived. He obliged because refusing would have been rude. Sable did not interrupt. Then, with the kind of grace that shows up when two freedoms agree to occupy the same square foot for a minute, Sable stepped until the brush and her shoulder were neighbors. He did not move the brush. He did not move his eyes. She turned so that the white crescent offered itself and then looked away as if looking would make the offer smaller. He lifted the brush an inch and stopped. He let the mare smell the inch. He set the brush back down. He lifted it 2 inches and waited. He set it down. He lifted it again and touched the air a hand's breadth from her hide, and the air accepted the touch and did not break. When the bristles finally met hair, it was in the most ordinary place on the earth, the flat of a shoulder. He brushed once, the shortest possible stroke, and stopped as if stopping were the form of wealth he preferred to spend. Sable exhaled a line of breath so quiet it was almost not a sound. He brushed twice and then did not brush again. He set the brush down where it had insisted on living and stepped away, the way a person leaves a room when he wants the room to keep talking. Outside, the wind made its own brush strokes on the grass. Inside the barn, a horse remembered that not all contact steals. From that day forward, Sable permitted touch where it did not remind her of being held against a lesson the teacher had not yet earned. The filly learned the small geometry of halter and lead, and the larger geometry of being asked and being answered. Thomas taught nothing he could not hum. He corrected nothing he could fix by turning his own body a half degree toward kindness. On the first bright blue after the solstice, he walked the filly to the round pen and opened the gate without entering. She hesitated, then stepped inside and found the center. He stood outside and let the day hold the rope. Sable stood along the rail and let her eyes become a roof. The filly walked the circle without being chased. She stopped when stopping was the more intelligent answer. She came when coming looked like a shared decision. After 7 minutes, he let her go. She went to Sable as if the round pen had been a story she wanted to tell her mother. They stood together for a long time, 2 dark commas in the bright sentence of noon. A hawk wrote a smaller sentence above them and folded the punctuation back into sky. It would be dishonest to say the mare surrendered anything. She did not. She collaborated with time. That is more difficult and more beautiful. She showed the yard that wild does not mean broken and gentled does not mean quieted. She taught the gate to stand ajar without inviting trouble. She taught the rope to behave like a word that can be spoken or not, depending on whether silence is doing a better job. When spring finally laid out its green language, the filly wore a coat that had learned shine from good hay and low stress. Sable wore another year the way a mountain takes a new season and makes it look like the first. On a morning with the creek talking too loud because it was happy to be back, Thomas set a second halter over the filly's nose and walked 2 steps and stopped and stood and breathed and removed it and walked away. The lesson fit in those things and did not need to be larger. The mare turned her head toward the hill where the willows had added height. She stepped forward and found the open gate as if she had commissioned it. She stopped, 1 hoof placed where the yard becomes world. Thomas stood a dozen paces behind her and let the light be a third participant. Sable looked at the field, at the ridge, at the fence line that had been mended, at the door that had been made and not demanded. Then she set her hoof down on the far side and walked forward. The filly came with her. They trotted a line parallel to the lane and then curved toward the cottonwoods, 2 bodies answering a question the air had posed. At the last stand of grass before the creek, Sable paused and looked back. The look was not request or confession. It was inventory. Barn, man, gate, door, sky. All counted, all present, all in their places. He lifted his hand in the smallest salute and did not wait for a return. They crossed the creek in a spray of bright water and climbed the low rise that made the plain look wider. When they were a long distance away, they looked like notation on a sheet of music. Then they did not look like anything. By evening, the yard had learned how to be itself again. Juniper wanted attention and then did not. The roan pony named Button would have made a case for apples if a case needed to be made. Birdie dreamed in her old way, one ear half open to the world and the other folded against the past. Ledger counted what could be counted and forgave what could not. The gate stood the way gates stand when they have earned trust. The sign at the lane gathered a new layer of dust and kept meaning the same thing. 3 days later at dusk, Sable appeared at the edge of the cottonwoods and stood where the yard could see her without mistaking her for belonging. The filly came to the water, drank like someone who has been moving honestly all day, and lifted her head with a string of drops like a jeweled bridle. Sable did not enter. Thomas did not invite. The light went to amber and then to a thin blue. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the train wrote its iron sentence and the sound flattened and then rose again. Before the dark took the color, the wild mare stepped forward and set one hoof in the yard. She looked to the door. She did not move to it. She did not need to. The door had learned its lesson. The door would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. She turned and left before needing to be asked. At the hill, the willows lifted small leaves like hands and let them tremble in the evening conversation. Thomas stood among the stones and said no names and all of them. He let the breeze move his shirt against his ribs. He thought of the white crescent on a black shoulder and of scars that had turned into emblems and of doors that had learned humility. Back at the barn, he hung the halter and brushed a few hairs from the aisle where the filly had shed her winter version of herself. He cleaned the brush and set it with the bristles up the way the room preferred, and turned the lantern down until the circle of light rode low and gentle on the floor. He left the door open to the night with the faith of someone who had seen what wildness does when it is allowed to remain whole. The plane carried its own weather that night. A silver band of clouds drifted east and dismissed themselves. The stars rehearsed an old story and found new meaning in it. Somewhere in the pasture, a horse exhaled in the slow language of lives that do not bargain. He stood in the doorway and let his breath find the same sentence. He did not know if Sable would come tomorrow or next week or ever again. He knew the gate would be ready, and the barn would not teach surrender, and the rope would continue being a word that could be spoken or not. He knew that refusing to be tamed is not the same as refusing to be known. He closed his eyes and saw a black mare standing in the shape of a door she did not enter, and felt more gratitude than a single body ought to hold. He opened his eyes and found the night still there, unchanged by gratitude. He nodded to it as to an equal and went to bed. In the morning, the yard had a new story in the dust near the threshold. A crescent print, deeper than the others, turned toward the interior of the barn and then away. He did not kneel to measure it. He did not call anyone to come see. He read it and let the reading be enough. Later, when children came on a bright Saturday in boots too new to be believed, he told them the simple rule here: we do not break what the wind built. We make doors and wait. A dark mare watched from the far shade where the cottonwoods keep the secrets they are paid to keep. She stood as a teacher stands when the lesson is already in the room and the students need only time to hear it. By evening, the sky burned down to its coals and the creek bragged. A little less and the barn's shadows lengthened and softened. He moved through the yard unhurried, checking what needed checking and leaving alone what had learned to stand alone. The sign at the lane caught the last light and returned it. The wild mare who refused to be tamed belonged to no one and to everything. The door belonged to whoever needed it. The man belonged to the promise he had written into his work. The plane breathed in and out and did not finish. And in that unfinished space a life went on that knew how to keep its edges and still be touched by weather, by time, by the kindest version of a human hand. He turned down the lamp and left the door as he always did, open.